Don't worry about
Oh,
it.
hey,
Hey,
how are things?
things are good. Calling Chris Anderson in Windsor.
I am in Windsor, and Rick, you're still in Chicago. This is
I'm in
kind of
Chicago. I'm here for a while. I know you're going to be hitting the road, but I'm here
Right.
for a while. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. It's our last show of 2024.
exciting.
But it's also the first, as I just mentioned to Chris off the air, of 6 live shows in a row. So we're building up our live component. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping to bring you this show and all of our shows. And check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And Chris, you know the next thing I'm going to say.
I do. I'm getting ready.
Whether you're watching live or watching on replay or listening on the HHH
Podcast.
Yeah, very good.
So-
We are glad you're here, and today we'll be talking about the movie 6888 with our friend Kevin Hymel. So let us know you're here and what you're drinking. Chris, I'm not going to ask you what you're drinking because I'm going to get to that once we
You
get
are okay. All right.
on the line. So don't tell me yet what you're drinking. But while people are letting us know, let's just say thanks to all of our Patreon supporters, especially our top shelf patrons.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate it very much.
We do. And look, there's more room on this list.
I know.
You can join by clicking on patreon.com/history happy hour. We'd love to have you there. Chris, the audience is building up. It looks like we already have quite a few people. Okay. Tell me any of them.
Well, actually, I'm excited. Okay. Martin Boule from Gatineau, Quebec. So I think that's our first Quebecois viewer. So that's good. Susan, hope you're doing well. Harold Bolts. Mike Sears from Tennessee, and Lynn Hargrove. So
there's more people here than I can possibly. Craig Congdon, Lizzie Borden, Walla Morrison, Gail Wright, Ron Griswold.
Like Lucy at the Chocolate Factory.
Wow, yeah, and it's all running by so fast I can't even keep up with it. So we should get the show then on the road and underway.
I've dusted off the drumsticks.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, that was lame. I gave you. There we go. Thank you. All right.
The bar's open.
Bar's open.
Listen, our fellow Ambrose Tours historian Kevin Hymel has been on our show before to talk about the first 2 volumes of his series on General George Patton, that I think is going to 8 or 9 volumes.
I need lots of legs,
including The Next Generation, etc. But today he's joining us for a completely different reason. Back in 2019, Kevin wrote an article on the 6888 Postal Battalion. They were the only battalion of African-American women who went to Europe in World War II. And that was actually the second article he'd written about them. But it was that second article that became the basis for the new movie that just came out, the 6888, directed by Tyler Perry. So we thought that what we would do today is bring Kevin back on the show to talk about the 6888 and his movie experiences. Kevin Hymel, welcome once again. I think this is your 3rd appearance.
Yep, your ratings just went up. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin, did you bring a cocktail today?
Well, yes. I wanted to bring some class to your show, so I brought a.
Somebody's got to do it.
Cabernet Sauvignon. So.
I'm glad you're able to say that.
See?
There you go. You got a classy show now.
I do.
Very nice. Chris, how about you? Do you have a cocktail?
Well, I do. I have Dirty Water from 58 & Co., which is a gin that was distilled by yours truly and his lovely assistants, Anna and Madeline. So this is my gin.
Oh, fantastic.
And you?
I have, first of all, I want to show my glass, my shot glass here. Marilyn just got this for me. It's a typewriter on there that she got for me down at I think it was at it was at a museum in Key West.
Is that a hint?
The Tennessee Williams Museum.
Is that a hint? Are you supposed to stop yapping and start typing? Is that why you got that?
Probably. And I'm drinking a scotch called Craig Lackey. Craig Lackey.
Okay.
Be able to say it.
And where is that scotch from?
Scotland.
Scott, where's this guy from? Detroit.
I think it's from
Welcome.
Craiglachie, is my guess. It's just a wild one. I don't know. Listen, Kevin, let's start with the basics. So we did a show on the 688 about a year ago with Colonel Edna Cummings, who was a
Yes.
big part of the effort to have the unit awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. But of course, not everyone with us today might have seen that or remember it. So let's start out and say, what was the 6888? And also, how did you come across this story?
Sure. So, and Rick, I think you did a good job of summing them up. Really, it's the only African-American all-female unit to go overseas in World War II. And they were an independent battalion. So, you know, a lot of battalions or regiments, because the Army was segregated back then between white and black units. A lot of those black units had white officers. This was an entirely a female black unit. So there were no white officers in it at all. It was independent, which meant it had its own motor pool, you know, own staff, things like that. And so basically these women came over in February of 1945 with a very specific mission. And that was to sort of break a backlog of mail, and a little different from the movie. The mail that they were breaking up, the backlog they were breaking up, was mail that was going to soldiers in the field that had either transferred units, were in the hospital, or in, you know, the grave. Soldiers had been killed in combat. So when a letter went out to a soldier and couldn't be delivered, it basically bounced back to England and started to fill these hangars, you know, and there was no real solutions until these ladies really gave a crack at it. They were only given 6 months to get this done, and they did it in 3. So a pretty amazing achievement, a great contribution to their country, providing morale to the troops. And they really changed the face of the U.S. Army, because when people think of the Army, they would think of a white man in uniform fighting. And there's this great contribution by 855 African-American women that really, you know, did their lot for victory. And so for that, you know, they deserve our thanks, or at least our acknowledgement, because a lot of people didn't know they existed, which included me until about 2008. I was working at an Army program called Freedom Team Salute. And so basically the idea of this program was that, you know, soldiers get medals, but what about the people that support them? Athletes, comedians, actors, even politicians, their families, and veterans that, you know, would put on USO shows or go to speak to soldiers groups. And so we were, you know, kind of pinpointing people or groups to give these honors to. And one of my coworkers came up to me and she said, I want to do something on this 6888 unit. I know 3 veterans and I want to put on a ceremony for them. And my immediate response is, what is the 6888? And when she explained it to me, I said, well, then I want to write a story about them. And so I went and interviewed a woman named Mary Ragland, who is actually referenced in the end of the movie. And I met Mary in Northeast DC in a bit of a rough neighborhood. And as we were talking, as I was interviewing her, she went into her closet and pulled out all these papers and handed them to me. And these were like daily reports and muster rolls. And then I said, Mary, what is all this? And she goes, well, these are part of the unit records. And I said, where'd you get these? She said, well, I was the clerk, so I made copies, you know, now and again. And so I was so excited about this. I went down to the National Archives. I said, guys, pull the records for the 6888. I want to see everything you got. And they basically said, we don't have any records, because what happened was when Harry Truman desegregated the military, the U.S. Army destroyed the records of almost all the black units in the Army, because they said, well, we're one big happy army. There's no lineage necessary now. Those units are folded into white units. Rather nefarious, I would say, an action, but that's why there are no records of black MP units, but, you know, service battalions and the 6888. So I went back to Mary and I said, you are the archives for the unit. So using her documents and her recollections and interviews with the 2 other veterans, I wrote basically a history of the 6888 that got published with the Army Historical Foundation. And then I moved on. You know, I got other veterans to interview, other battles to write about. That's what I do. And one of the jobs I had was at Fort Leavenworth, writing tactical unit histories of the Afghanistan war. And I had left. I was working for the Air Force Medical Service in Texas, and friends started calling me from Fort Leavenworth saying, hey, they're putting up posters. They're building a monument to the 688, and here's the phone number. You need to call them. So I called. I talked to a guy named Carlton Philpott, and I didn't know what they wanted from me or how I could help. But the first thing he told me is we found 3 more veterans. And I said, well, give me one of them. I'll interview her, and they'll make a nice thing to go along with your, the monument dedication. So he says, have I got a veteran for you? And that was Lena Derricott King. And I called her up. She lived in Vegas. She was a total hoot. I loved her to death. Normally when I talk to a vet, I interview a vet for an article. I interview them like 2 or 3 times. Lena, I spoke to about 10 times. She would call me at work. Kevin, I just remembered another story, and I'd be jotting things down on paper and trying to get it into the story. At 95 years old, she was still cooking her own meals and going out dancing on Saturday nights. An amazing, amazing woman. And that is where the whole movie thing started, I guess.
So, Kevin, how is it that this unit sort of came into being, and did it come into being for this specific reason? I mean, because
task.
Yes.
So they were allowing African American women to join the Army and the WWII, the Women's Army Corps.
Yeah.
And they were dispersed all over the United States doing all kinds of tasks. And this problem arose. So I've never seen the direct line, saying, hey, we need you to deliver the mail. But they then said these women are going to go overseas. Any African-American women who volunteer can go overseas. Right. And so all these women that were already in the Army were sent down to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, where they did combat training for overseas service. And it was Charity Adams that is given the letter, basically, and it's actually pretty well portrayed in the movie, saying, you are going to tackle this problem of mail. So, so they already existed in the Army, and pressure from African American leaders. They said we've got a problem here, and they said, well, let these ladies take it. And so that's how it. And I wish I knew more details, but again, the record.
Yeah. So I guess that was the thing I was curious about, why it is that, and we should probably talk a little bit about her, but why Charity Adams, commands the unit, and why there's a whole African American staff as opposed to African American WACs with white WAC officers, like would have happened, say, at an infantry unit or an artillery unit, or how she was chosen, who she is, how she was chosen, and kind of why she got the job.
So she's actually, I think, she's not only the first African American woman to graduate the sort of ROTC school in Des Moines, Iowa. I think she's the first woman to graduate, period, because her last name was Adams, and the Army hadn't segregated the black and white women yet. So, she graduated with white women, okay. And I think her number was 0001.
Right.
So being, whenever you're the first, that brings eyes on, and she was just steadily given different commands. She remained in Iowa and continued training African-American women and women as they processed through the camp. And so where these women are rotating in and around the country, she's staying in one place and kind of building her reputation as a strict leader, a disciplinarian, someone the women looked up to. So I think that was a big factor in it. I haven't really seen any letters saying we need this woman to do it. So I think that kind of explains why Charity Adams. And then as for, what was the second question, Chris?
Well, just the fact that they're giving these African-American women this unit and not going the route of, okay, well, all of you African-American women can be privates and corporals in this unit, but we've got some white women who'll be your lieutenants and captains. And
yeah, so I'm not positive. I think it's because it was an independent battalion. Right. And so normally you'd have a unit like that attached to an infantry division. So it's a lot of whites. Whereas this thing was really kind of self-contained and really answered to General Lee and COMZ, the Service and Supply Command of Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to break away for a moment from our conversation, but I wanted to mention that I double checked this information that somebody typed in on the side, and President Jimmy Carter has passed away, and that news has just broken since we went on the air, and he was 100 years old.
Mhm.
I met him in the White House. I've got a picture of him right above the computer. Him, and I'm there, 3 people over from him in that picture. But what a tremendous person. And we don't want to get sidetracked on that and spend the rest of the hour talking about Jimmy Carter, Kevin.
Well,
But
I'll tell you a quick story about Jimmy Carter. When he was president and I was a very young kid, my dad got us tickets to the Navy Georgia Tech game, played in Baltimore, I think it was, because Jimmy Carter had gone to both. He was a Naval Academy grad and got his master's degree from Georgia Tech. And so he was coming to the game and was going to sit on one side and then the other. And then when he left, he came up to the press boxes, went down an aisle or a hallway to take an elevator down to Marine One. And so we all went out into the hallway, and I wanted to know, was he rooting for Navy or Georgia Tech? And I didn't realize it was an election year because I'm a kid. And so he comes down the hallway, and just as he's getting in the elevator, I said, Mr. President, who are you voting for? And he turned around and just started laughing and goes, who am I voting for? And so that was my one moment with Jimmy Carter.
So he never answered, so we don't know.
No, he was too busy laughing at my superiors.
Oh, okay.
I met him for the first time at a press conference during the New Hampshire primary in 1976, winter of 76, or fall of 75 maybe. And but I asked a question at this news conference, and he said, "Good question, Rick." I thought,
I tell
there
you
you
what,
go.
let's raise our glasses to the president.
Yeah, here's to Jimmy
Yeah.
Carter. But I also think that it does connect with our story in the sense that although I am speculating here as well as you guys, I think the involvement of the president and the woman who's played by Oprah Winfrey in the movie, what's her name, Kevin?
Mary McLeod Bethune.
Bethune. I think there was some pressure, not just assign these women to the postal problem, but there was like, let's do something to show what they can do, and that's probably how they got there. So okay, so you and we have. I'm noting in the comments we have a lot of people here who are descendants of 688 veterans, and as well as other people interested in the story. So what you wrote this second article in 2019
Correct.
about Lena. So I guess I would say, what is the day? Tell me about the day that you realized that Tyler Perry was interested in making a movie.
So, Kevin, I just want to interject here that Rick is really trying to find out how you did it so he can try to read. So just, either totally make it up, totally make it up, or a lot of detail.
Well, short answer first and long answer. Short answer, never. And I didn't do squat. What happened was Carl Nam, the publisher of WWII History Magazine, called me up and said, this is movie worthy, this article you've written. I know a producer named Carlota Espinoza, and I'm going to send it to her. And if she likes it, we'll do a conference call. And so I was like, okay, I really had zero expectation. And so we had the conference call. Carlota said she was very excited about it. And she was going to act on it and have me sign what's called a shopping agreement, meaning I will not shop the idea around.
Right.
And not knowing anything, I actually called a few lawyers, like, what's the deal with the shopping agreement? And so they explained it to me. But I thought, in all of my years of all of my writings, no one's ever asked me not to shop around an article to another producer. So what have I got to lose? And so she brought her other producer buddy, Carrie Selig, on board. And so we would just have these conversations every couple of weeks or months. And they would just say, yeah, we've talked to these people and that people. And then suddenly they were talking about Netflix. And then one day Carlota called me and she said, Tyler Perry's going to call you in the next day or two. And I went, yeah, right. And 2 days later, Tyler called and we started chatting. And he goes, now I understand you're the guy that wrote the article. Is that right? And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Perry. And he said, it's Tyler. And so I said, okay, Tyler. And then from then on, we worked on the phone almost every day, if not every other day. He was working on the script, and that guy was working on this thing 24/7. I didn't know this at the time, but see, I always assumed they read my article, they were wowed by it, and Tyler said, "I want to make this." That's not how Hollywood works. What happened was Carlota and Carrie created something called a sizzle reel, which is kind of a fake movie trailer. And so, you provide the information with a lot of visuals. And that's what Tyler saw and said, I got to make this movie. And then flew to Las Vegas and met with Lena and interviewed her. And I'm assuming she told him basically the same stuff that she told me. And then he read the story and reached out to me. So it was a little humbling. And you guys know how I don't like to be humbled.
Yeah. Modesty, Kevin. Modesty. That's right.
So, but in the long run, what difference does it make? Carlota, Carrie, and Tyler were all on board, and it amazed me, and I it was an anomaly how long it took, but there was a pandemic in between and a writer's strike, so those kind of things delayed it. But Tyler had me come in for the table read. He flew me in for that. He flew me to Las Vegas for Lena's receiving the Congressional Gold Medal. Then he flew me down to Atlanta for filming. Oh, that's Lena when she got the Congressional Gold Medal, and I pinned her corsage on her. I think Carlota actually took that photo. So it's just been a wonderful experience beyond any of my hopes and dreams. I mean, I write. That's what I do. I enjoy publishing and having people read my stuff. So this all came to me out of left field, and I just kind of rode along and enjoyed the ride. And there was no real negative to it. It was all just very positive and satisfying. And I was glad that something I wrote, people looked at and said, this is important and this can be told in a way that people can relate. And the credit for that goes to Tyler. I always said that this was my movie. My movie's coming out soon. Make sure you watch my movie. But then when I sat down and really watched it, I'm like, no. This is Tyler's movie. He is the creative genius that put all this together, created, these little links within the movies about letters and rings and stuff like that. I could have never done what he did. And I'm in awe of what he did. So it has just been a fantastic experience.
So, Kevin, in the process of doing all this, what kind of background do you have, or did you have to go on? Because as you said, you had some photocopies of some unit records, but there wasn't anything else. So, kind of where did the background research come from, and how did you apply that to this movie?
So basically, I used my first article because I ended up interviewing 2 more women from the unit about their experiences. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because one of them was a Jeep driver. She didn't really do the mail, but she gave me a great detailed account of the cruise over on the Ile-de-France, because they did go through a storm and they did have a U-boat attack. And so I was able to provide more detail. And early on in the production, I was talking to the producers about the interior of a German U-boat, because I think they wanted to have the German U-boat commander, firing torpedoes and things like that. It's amazing, that the original ideas and how they change and get boiled down to when you get till you get to end product. So really, we leaned heavily on those documents I used to write the first article, and then after that, it was really oral history interviews.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Kevin, you alluded to the fact that you were frequently on the phone with Tyler Perry mm-hmm. Over the course of making this film. Were you involved in creating this story? Because clearly you didn't do, what I probably would have done, which is hand off the article, cash in the check, and wait to see what the screenplay would look like.
Well, Tyler was kind enough to make me a technical advisor, and I wanted to help him. If he called, he didn't go to the message, thing. I answered every time he called. And so he would ask me about training facilities. And so I would find photos of training facilities, or the women when they were doing gas mask training, things like that. And that helped him with his vision. And then he would say like, hey, can I say this? And then I'd say, not really. You want to phrase it like that, so just little things. Cause he was, his background is really telling personal stories and comedies. And this was a real step up for him.
Right.
And thank God he took the challenge. So I was helping him every way I could. So like, there were like little things, like there was a meeting in that meeting in the White House. One of the generals sitting there is George C. Marshall. And when he wrote out the script, Roosevelt says, well, George, can't we help this out?
Oh, can't do
and
that.
I said, no, nobody called George C. Marshall George. Roosevelt tried it once in 1939. He said, can I call you George? And he goes, that's General Marshall, sir. And so, so he took that out of the movie. So, lots of little details that he wanted to get right and I wanted to help him with. And no movie's perfect. But I always say the directors have two things: vision and a budget. And you're gonna help them as much as you can, but they've got their vision and they know what they can do with their budget.
So I guess that kind of raises the question, Kevin. And I'm not saying this to be like kind of accusatory or like but how do you handle? I mean, you work in history.
Yep.
We all here work in history, and obviously Hollywood and movies, that's a whole separate ball of wax.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you?
We all have had involvement in that as well.
We have all been,
Chris.
yes, we've all seen that. Yes, truth in lending. But how did they balance that in the movie? And I'm not asking you, is it accurate or not accurate?
Right.
But how do you balance those two forces?
Answer in the English language, but in any way you want.
Yes.
Well, it reminds me of what Chris Green told me. He was a naval historian at, Naval Command in the Navy Yard here in DC. And he became a technical advisor on the set of Pearl Harbor. And he called me up and said, when you see this movie and you spot things wrong, just think how much would have been wrong if I wasn't there. Because you need to understand, I'm an advisor. I don't tell the director what to do. I advise. And he decides. And so I went into this movie with that attitude. And early on, I told Tyler, I said, listen, I'm an historian. I deal in fact. You're a movie maker. You have to tell a story within 2 hours. I'm always going to tell you the facts, but I'm not going to fight with you and I'm not going to die on any hill. I understand what you're up against, the time constraints and everything. And so I'll always tell you what the facts are, and you can take it or leave it. I'm not going to give you pushback. And so that's how I went into it. And like I said, he was very receptive, but there were things that I didn't understand. So one of the very first scenes we did was the guys kind of coming off the battlefield, and they're getting ready, they're setting the scene up. And I went, oh my God, they should have condoms on their rifles. It's kind of raining. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, well, that's what they did in World War II to keep the rain out of their barrels. And so, gets on the bullhorn. Who's got a condom or condoms? And people either didn't have any or wouldn't admit to having any. So that was null. And then I said, wait a second. The other thing, this is 1943. 2/3 of these guys should have cigarettes, dangling out of their mouths. And one of the other advisors pulled me over and he said, listen, if they have cigarettes in their mouths, it's rated R. We're trying to keep this PG. And I went, oh, I understand now. So there's things that, there's rules that kind of like the hard deck in Top Gun that are not flexible. And so I had to learn those things as we went through also.
Right.
I want to remind everybody that we are chatting today with Kevin Hymel, who wrote the article upon which the movie The 688 is based. And he was also a historical consultant on that film. And if you have any questions for Kevin, please send them in and we'll see if we can't get a few of them on the air. Kevin, you were on set. I don't know how many days or for all the days or just a few days. You were on set 2 days.
Yep.
And so we have you here we go. It's during the Battle of San Pietro there.
Yep.
We have you on set and you got to kind of see everything in action. What was that experience like? What stories do you have from that?
Again, learning experience, because I would go to Tyler and say, hey, we need to change this. And finally, the poor guy finally said, Kevin, take notes and tell me at the end. I'm trying to make a movie here. So I did that very dutifully. and they had all the soldiers walk by me to make sure about weapons and uniforms and everything. And I remember at one point, that's the ladies actually coming off the ship. At one point, I go, wait a second, these guys, these reenactors, half of them have gray hair. And again, another advisor pulled me over and said, yeah, Kevin, COVID. And I went, oh, because obviously they had recruited younger people, but because of COVID, people dropped, getting sick, they couldn't keep, young people on the set. They were constantly replacing them. So that was a good lesson in the challenges they faced. The pictures you showed of the women coming off the ship, the big one there was, excuse me, that's good wine. They're ordered to march by Charity Adams. And that, of course, played by Kerry Washington. And the day before I flew down, I got a call from Stanley Early, Charity Adams's son. And he said, can I tell you some things about my mom? And I said, yeah. So he told me these things. I fly down. I went over to Kerry Washington. And I said, can I tell you some things? There's the action photo. And she said, what do you got? And I said, well, Charity Adams wore yellow gloves during the war because she wanted to look a little different from everybody else. She didn't want to look the same. And Carrie just kind of cocked her head back and went, wardrobe. And this guy came running over. She said, you got to get me yellow gloves. He goes, we can't get them for you for this scene, but we're going to try to get them for you by the end of the movie. And then she looked at me and she said, all right, Kevin, what else you got? And I said, she liked to play ping pong. And she was, Kevin, what am I supposed to do with that? And I go, I don't know. Think about ping pong when you're playing the role. And so they have the scene where she gets up on the Jeep and she gives the orders to the women. And it took about 3 or 4 takes to get it all just right. And she stepped off the Jeep and I looked at her and I said, I could tell you were thinking about ping pong. So that was my moment with Kerry Washington, and just very classy woman and a very serious actress. Like she took a lot of umbrage and seriousness to the role. She knew that she was portraying a real person. And I'll tell you, when the women marched, Tyler had a bullhorn and they marched towards the camera and he yells, cut. And he says, come on, ladies, you can march better than that. You're black. And everybody kind of starts laughing. And then he gets serious on the bullhorn. He goes, hey, don't make me yell at you. And worse, don't make Medea yell at you. And he goes into the Medea voice and everybody's just cracking up. And it was just so cool because here he is, organizing hundreds of people for these scenes. And yet he's personable, friendly, and kind. And it just made being on set a pleasant thing. He wasn't yelling and screaming at people and, someone muffed a line. He wasn't getting all bent out of shape. He knew what he wanted. And he knew how to motivate people. And I was just impressed with him in everything he did.
So, one of the things I kind of got to get your take on is, obviously way back in the day now, I had a little bit of involvement with Band of Brothers and I knew the guys. And I remember talking to some of the actors and they certainly had a sense of what they were trying to do. It was not just another war movie.
Right.
And I'm sure there was the same kind of feeling on the set there.
Oof.
But maybe you could, if you could talk about that a little bit. Did they realize what they were doing?
Oh yeah. And I'm going to backtrack a bit to the table read. And so this is basically people sitting around a long table, reading their lines. And they have this one woman at the far end, reading the narration, scene 2 on a street, these traffic noise, that kind of stuff. And so all these young ladies showed up and they all did their hair in 1940s hairdos. And I just thought that was so cool. You could tell from the beginning, even when they're not going to be on camera, that they were wearing their hair in 1940s hairdos. I was so impressed with that. And we're all sitting around the long table and we're all kind of chatting. And I mentioned the woman sitting on the far end, and the other far end is Tyler. And I'm kind of sitting against the wall because I'm not really part of all this. And where everybody's kind of chit chat and everything. And then all of a sudden there's this booming voice. Let's make a movie. And in struts Kerry Washington. Nobody was expecting her to be there except for Tyler. And the look on these young ladies' faces when they were just like, wow, that's the woman I want to be someday, or that's the woman I look up to. I felt so happy for them. And then as filming got started, they did a large chat, which I really wished I was a part of, with Tyler and all the actresses. And one of the scenes, the squares was blank. And so, Tyler kind of introduces, he's talking to the young ladies how important this is. And then boom, the blank screen pops up and it's Oprah telling these young ladies how important this movie is, and that, these women did their job with dignity and you need to reflect that in your performances. And so, to be spoken to sternly by Oprah, something's important. Yeah. So I think every step of the way, these young ladies appreciated it, and understood its significance and importance. The young lady who plays Johnny May, who's sort of a little bit comic relief, the sort of livelier of the gang. I saw her at the premiere after party, and I was chatting with her and then her parents. And her parents were just so proud of her. She had mostly done theater before this movie. And to see the pride in the parents' eyes, talking about not just their daughter was in a movie, but in a movie with so much significance, to the African-American portion of our country and to all of our country, that, that's important, sort of awakening. Like, look at this thing that happened that no one really has known about. That, yes, every element, pretty much every person on set realized the importance of what we were doing.
So, Kevin, something that just occurred to me. So, somebody was asking about your experiences on set, and you've talked about that a little bit. But you sent me some photos, and so I'm just going to share here. Sure. And you were on set for 2 days. You said,
yep, uh-huh.
2 days. So, one of the photos is this photo of the women marching, and they're marching by that blue wall, and that blue wall is chroma key, and that's going to become the ship that they're marching by.
Correct.
And then another photo that you sent. Your photos that you sent is here at the Battle of San Pietro, which is a completely different part of the film. It's shot in it takes place in a completely different part of the world, because this is in Italy as opposed to the other scene, which is in England. Were these actually 2 scenes that they were shooting simultaneously, or on the 2 days that you were there? I mean, it just sort of seems like crazy movie making scheduling.
Nope, that's called movie magic. So Tyler Perry purchased Fort McPherson. So when the Army bracked base realignment and closure, when the military started consolidating, they basically had an empty fort, and Tyler Perry bought that, and it is just acres and acres. And so in one area they had this open field, and so they built that to be a battlefield. And we did all that and had lunch, and then went to another side where the ship scene was. And I think it was a former rail yard, because it had a lot of buildings and stuff, and snow blowers. And it was to me, it was exciting and really cool how they make that you would assume that they're going to Italy and England, and all of that magic is taking place in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Atlanta. Okay.
Which is exotic in its own way.
Of course it is.
Yes.
Were you about to say something, Rick?
No, I was just no. When I come back, I'll bring in some of the questions from viewers.
Well, bring in some of the questions.
Bring it on.
Okay. So here's a question. Someone says, was Eleanor Roosevelt aware of this unit? Now, clearly in the movie, Eleanor Roosevelt, played by Susan Sarandon, is very aware of this unit, but do we know anything about, in real life, was she actually involved, or did she have any knowledge of the 6888?
Not to my knowledge, not, or at least not in any of the letters and things that I saw. Mary McLeod Bethune corresponded a great deal with Eleanor Roosevelt on just numerous civil rights issues, so it wasn't just exclusive to the 6888. And so Eleanor Roosevelt was acutely aware that African Americans were being treated like secondary citizens, and did everything in her power to try to level the battlefield on race issues. And of course, she was very big on women's rights. But I have not seen any specific letter from or to Mrs. Roosevelt about the 6888. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I have not seen it in my research.
Well, and actually, Kevin, the other question I wanted to ask, you may probably don't have an answer, but there are the Army wrote, and it's the Green Book series about there's the employment or deployment of African American combat troops. Things have been written about African American units in World War II. We've heard about Tuskegee, we've heard about 761, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, the question is, why does this unit get forgotten about? But more specifically, or something I'm more curious about, is it seems like it got also lost in the African American community. I mean, I can understand like institutional racism. We're not going to talk about that. But why afterwards they're gone?
Yep. So the first question, the Army Green Book about employing Black troops, and of course it doesn't use that word. They talk about the deployment of African American women WAC units within the United States.
Right.
Never talks about them overseas.
Right.
And I believe, and we always stress the fact that it's the only African American female WAC unit, because U.S. Army nurses, African American nurses, were going overseas with the Black divisions and regiments. And then to answer your second part of your question, I mean, I've talked to a number of descendants, and they're just like, yeah, Mom never talked about it. Mom, which we all know that refrain, right? And so when I interviewed Lena, and even when I interviewed Mary, but Lena very specifically, Lena was surprised that here somebody was approaching her to ask her about 2 years of her life that were so far in the past. She had gone into design, owned her own stores, had a rough marriage and then a really good marriage living out on the West Coast. She just had so many great stories. Why are you interested in these 2 years, young man? And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is what I live for. So I think it's that combination of the women coming home, getting no recognition, and just never speaking about it, like so many white veterans who want to just come home, forget about the war, start a family, and get on to that next chapter of their life. And then, and I don't know if you guys have encountered this, a lot of people say like, oh, my dad, even when they were alive, my dad doesn't talk about it. My dad never talks about it. But when I would interview soldiers and I would say, well, do you remember this town? And this was your division commander. Did you ever meet him? When you start giving them solid things, showing them you've done your research, they would open up. They would talk. Yeah. So a lot of kids didn't know what to ask their fathers. Dad, did you fight in the war?
Did you kill anybody? Did you see anybody be killed? And those questions will shut people down right away.
Exactly. So I think it's a combination of those reasons, that they just didn't know to ask, Mom, what did you do in the war? Because I'm sure they were of the same assumption. Well, men went out and fought the war. Women didn't do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I ran into that with Ghost Army veterans. The very same thing that you said that Lena said to you. They were like, I can't believe you're asking me about this 1 year of my life. I've been a photographer. I've been an architect. I've done all these things, and you're asking me to go back. Did you run into that at all, Chris, with the guys from the?
Well, obviously, yeah, sure. I mean, and that's a very common response, I guess. The thing that I was so curious about with this unit is they did have such a unique story, and there's a whole lot of issues that gets raised because of what they do. And it's just curious to me that in the years since that they hadn't come up at all. I know we've had guests before that have said that, World War II was sort of that forgotten period of the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
because a lot of things get started at that time, and the veterans at the time, they don't think about it. But it's just curious to me that.
And you guys know this, that when you're in the moment of doing something, you do not understand the significance.
Sure.
So these women, to them, we're just out here catching up the mail. They didn't sit there and go, God, can you believe we're the only unit of our kind here? Like that. They were busy doing their service, and trying to get some sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. Kevin, somebody, Cheryl Thompson Holt wants to know how many veterans of the 6888 are buried at Arlington. I have no idea if there's any there.
Yeah, we have a number of them, including my good friend Mary Ragland. I want to say we have anywhere from 6 to 10. In fact, if you Google how many 6888 women are buried at Arlington, I wrote a blog with somebody else about that.
I was going to say, if only we had a historian from Arlington
Yeah,
Cemetery
no
on the show with us, they could. Oh, wait a minute.
Yes,
Okay.
so that does exist. That information, I can't tell it off the top of my head. And so when Tyler and Carrie came to lay a wreath, I really wanted them to lay. Then they went into the cemetery and visited some 688 graves. I really wanted them to go to Mary Raglan, but they had such a tight schedule they could only go to like one part of the cemetery. And of course, I got kicked out of the cemetery that day because they didn't want to have any conflict of interest with one of their historian contractors and all that stuff. But
so somebody in our comments, Carmen Jordan Cox.
I love Carmen Jordan Cox.
Says 14. My mom is one of them. So
I'm going to be on her show in a few days from now. She is a professor and judge, if I remember correctly. And she came on the tour, the 6888 tour. That's where I got to meet her.
Okay.
And she has a podcast about the 6888.
Wow. Okay. Well, Professor Jordan Cox, thank you for joining us today. I hope we're giving you some good clues as to what you can talk about. We do want a percentage of the big money you're making from your
I
podcast.
hope I do well on your show too, ma'am.
So Kevin,
assuming I'm doing well here.
Well, we'll get back to that.
There's one or two viewers still here.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to ask a question and wrap it into another question. And what happens to this unit post-war? What do these women end up doing? You can't watch a movie like this or read about a unit like this and not ask what's the legacy of this unit, which is going to lead into the question from Lynn Stramek, which is there any memorial dedicated to the memory of these women and their service? So wrap that all up.
So to answer the first question, they, and this is mentioned in the movie, they're sent to Rouen, France, with the same mission. The war is over, but they got to catch the mail up. And they kind of experience real war because, I mean, the place is all bombed out. And French civilians, a lot of them Jewish, are coming through asking for food. And so they're seeing all these emaciated people. And then they're sent home, but first they're sent to Paris. And Mary Raglan was telling me how, she had come from, abject poverty and, and here they are in Paris and they've got concierge and, a concierge at the front desk and someone doing their beds for them and chefs making their meals, and what a different world that was for her. And they get sent home in 1946. My buddy Lena actually stayed another year and took some textile and design classes. I can't remember if they were in France and England. I think they were in England. And she ended up going home with a group of women nurses, white women nurses. And she said, we got along so well, but as they approached New York Harbor, they were talking about how hard it's going to be to find jobs or something like that. And one of the women said, yeah, it's about as hard as finding an N-word in a wood pile. And she said, I looked at her and she looked at me and didn't say a word, but it just reminded me what I was going home to. So these women came home, were expected to be wives and mothers. Their service to their country was pretty much forgotten. It was the guys that did the fighting that got all the attention. But even those guys came home and wanted to move on with their lives. There is that period in there in the late 1940s where people just didn't talk about it. They were too busy applying to colleges and getting married and having kids. And so the legacy, it just kind of dries up and disappears. I mean, which one of us had ever heard about it prior to 2009, And in fact, I remember being in the Pentagon and seeing the famous photograph of Charity Adams and inspecting the troops. And it said, African-American women served in World War II also. No context. That picture was posted everywhere, but nobody understood the context. So the whole reason that I interviewed Lena was because they were making a memorial to the women at Fort Leavenworth. And so that was why I wrote the article, was to back up this big ceremony that was coming up. And I just randomly asked Carlton Philpott, do you have a vet I can interview? And that's when he said, oh, I've got the perfect one, this woman, Lena Darricott King. And so the article came out late enough that I was able to write a sidebar about the ceremony they had
Mhm.
for the women. And they had them in cars with the tops down, driving through the streets of Fort Leavenworth. They let the schools out. So kids were on the sidewalks waving flags and everything. It was a beautiful ceremony and honoring them. And I attended, they went to a big sort of rec room attached to the chapel where the women signed autographs and things.
Yeah.
And that's where I met Lena for the first time, and Edna. In fact, when Lena went to introduce me to her daughter, or to her caretaker, she said, this right here, this is Kevin Hymel. And Edna, who I'd never met before, kind of turned around. She's like, "You're Kevin Hymel?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "We use the language of your first article to write the legislation for them to get the Congressional Gold Medal."
Mm.
And I told Edna, I said, "There's nothing you could have told me to make me feel better than I feel right now." So I take almost as much pride in helping those women get the Congressional Gold Medal, although Edna and Liz Helms-Fraser did all the real work. But I take a lot of pride in my little role there as much as I do the movie. You know, they're both very important. What else was I going to tell you? Oh my God, at this ceremony, I think at least 7 people came up to me and said, "You look different from what we thought you were going to look like." And I said, "Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I'm white."
Yeah. We knew. We
Yeah.
knew. But your friend Carmen Jordan Cox, who's coaching you in what you should say, clearly you're just a mouthpiece. No, I'm just kidding. She wants to say, don't forget to mention Fort Greg Adams.
Yes. So the Army, I guess it was last year, you know, the Army put in this big effort to sort of get rid of names of people who kind of turned against our country and fought against it, and name different forts and streets and all these different things, rename, Fort Liberty and things like that. And so what they did with Fort Bragg was they named it, and I'm not 100% happy about this, after 2 people, General Gregg and Charity Adams.
It's not Fort Bragg, because that becomes Fort Liberty.
Benning, Fort Benning. I'm sorry, Fort Benning. And so they've renamed the fort Fort Greg Adams, and everybody keeps saying, "Who's Greg Adams?" And I really wish they had just named it Fort Charity Adams, but it'd been so horrible. It's just, the first African American battalion commander. I think she's worthy, but still, Charity Adams is the only African American woman to have an Army base named after her, and so that'll be the real lasting legacy. Decades from now, when the movie's forgotten and the Congressional Gold Medals in the past, there will still be Fort Greg Adams. And, as you guys know from being on military bases, there's always information kiosks about the history of the fort and how it got its name. So that'll be the real statue to the 688 and Charity Adams.
And it was Fort Lee that was renamed.
Geez, third time was going to be the try. Thank you, Carmen Jordan.
So yeah, you have these fact checkers that follow you around, Kevin. I think
Carmen, do you have anything that you want me to say? Because I feel like you're a good source of information.
Just remember, I'm doing this without notes. So when Dr. Cox
playing a tiny violin,
when Dr. Cox starts sending like math problems and go, "Kevin, what's 57 divided by 6?" And I don't know, I'll accept it. But yeah, I'm doing the best I can.
Can I ask him another question, Chris?
Of course you can.
Since you had your hand up, yes.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. I'm wondering, and we're nearing. And clearly he's 4.
Yeah, whenever you ask a question,
there's a lot of wine gone from that bottle. So, I'm wondering, as we approach the end of our show, did working on the film or seeing the film, but anything involved in the process of the film, change in any way your perception of the unit and the story? Got to take at least a minute and a half with your answer.
Yeah, I don't think so, because the scripts were coming through and I was trying to keep up with them. So I knew I was watching the changes as they occurred. And I was trying to talk to the young ladies as much as I could about the history of the unit. No, not really. I was just so happy when it came out. It premiered for me in Washington, D.C. in the African American History Museum. And the audience was a lot of people in the military who had not seen it before. And they had such a raw emotional reaction to almost every scene that I was just so happy that people were identifying with it, feeling invested in it, and enjoying it on so many levels that I didn't even think about. There's scenes that Tyler has put together that the audience was roaring with laughter. And I was like, wow, I looked at that scene 15 times. I forgot, or maybe I didn't even know how funny it was, that the irony that he would kind of put on display and things like that. So it was just so enjoyable to see other people enjoying this endeavor. When you guys know that when people read your articles or books and they really like it, it's just so sad. That's why we do it, that we want other people to feel engaged with what we're doing and want to be part of it, And so, no, I really didn't change anything.
I do it for the money.
There you go. Or there's always that. Well,
which is why you have a 1-bedroom.
This is why I'm living in a hovel. Right. Kevin, so I want to say thank you. I want to say a couple of things before we let you go.
Sure.
One is there's been a fabulous conversation going on in the sidebar here, and most of it is on Facebook. So those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you have the opportunity and you want to go back and take a look at the Facebook version of this program, which the link is on historyhappyhour.com. There's a lot of information that's going on. There's a lot of family members of 688 veterans here. And so that's really worth taking a look at. And Kevin, a number of people, let me also say, we've talked a lot about Carmen Jordan Cox.
Yes.
And her podcast is called Next US 818 Podcast. That's what she wrote, Next US 818 Podcast. And her email, which she put up here, for those of you who don't see it, is nextus818podcast@gmail.com. And Kevin, there are a number of people who would like to get in touch with you. Perhaps you're way above that and you don't want to speak with them.
He has people now.
Right. If you could refer them to a secretary who could perhaps leave you a message.
Send them to my assistant, Chris Anderson. He will take care of all of that. So my email is kevin.hymel@gmail.com. So KEVIN.HYMEL@gmail.com. And maybe you guys can post it or something for people to see and harass me. So it's
Kevin.Hymel,
yada, yada, yada.
At gmail.com, right?
Yep.
So Kevin, I just hit it. You can look at it, see if I got it correct. I often don't pronounce your name correctly, but I think at least I've typed it incorrectly. It should be the last.
Welcome to the rest of the world. So yeah. I don't see it. Like I said, I've been having technical difficulties. So this is on my
right. You're on your phone. Right. You said so. It's probably this big.
Is that one?
So,
can you read
that? No, he's got it up on the screen.
Oh.
Can you? Sure.
Okay.
All right, folks. Kevin, we want to thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the 688. We didn't. I'm sorry, Chris. I got one more. There's always one more. I gotta ask one more because I was really wondering about this. Did Lena, who is the star of this movie, this is a movie about her experience. Did she died a year ago? Did she get to see a cut of the movie?
Thank God, yes. Tyler brought a rough cut to her. She was living in a hospice at the time, and she watched it. And according to Tyler, she saluted several times during the movie and told him she absolutely loved it. So whenever someone's critical about anything, I go, hey, Lena King, let Lena Derricott love the movie. That's what's important to me. So I'm so happy she got to see that. All the love to Tyler for making that extra effort. He's not about the money. He is really about telling people stories, and he cares about people. And I think that's a perfect example of it. Him going out of his way, flying to Las Vegas, going into hospice care just to show her a rough cut of the movie so she would see what the folks are going to see.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much. We've been talking today about the movie 688. It's available on Netflix, which is a small, little-known cable system that you can dig up.
It might make it to YouTube eventually, so don't worry.
Yeah. Hey, and I want to you guys how much I appreciate you both, because usually when I do a podcast or a show, they go, "Oh, you're the guy that answered his phone, so we're so glad you're on our show." You know, as we tried Tyler, we tried Carrie, we tried Oprah, and we got you.
We didn't even ask any of those people.
Yeah.
We don't want those people. We said no. We want to talk to Kevin. So we appreciate it. Kevin Hymel, thank you so much for joining us. We'll say goodbye to you in a moment, but we'll take you off the feed right now. Thank you very much for being on History Happy Hour today. Chris Anderson. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we still have all these people here with us. We should
Correct.
mention that we have coming up next week. We have our favorite. I mean, we love Kevin, but our all-time favorite guest, because he's been on 5 times already, and this is his 6th time. And Kevin appreciates that I waited until he was off the air before I said that. Joe Balkowski will be back to join us to talk about his book. That's the wrong.
one.
I brought up the wrong one, but his book is called The Last Roll Call. Yeah. And it is the 5th book in his 5-volume series about the 29th Division. Joe's an incredible guest. The story of the 29th is one of the amazing stories of the war in Europe. So please join us next week.
It's a really important series of books. And it'll be nice to kind of complete this cycle and have him talk about the end of the story. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too. I think that'll be great. Guys, please subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. Shout at us on Twitter, or X, as it is now known.
Bluebird? Do we have Bluebird? Is it Bluebird?
Uber? Call us on Uber. Call an Uber.
No, Bluebird said whatever. Okay, never mind.
Okay. Listen to our podcast. Back us on Patreon and browse us. Come, just go to historyhappyhour.com and browse. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Okay. If I could just hit the freaking button.